Last year, Bertelsmann, the owner of Penguin Random House, largest trade publisher in the world, announced that they were buying Simon & Schuster, third largest publisher in the United States, from Viacom-CBS for $2.2 billion. Last week, the Department of Justice filed a complaint to block the acquisition. And that wasn't the surprising part. The surprising part is that the DOJ's complaint isn't about how this acquisition would negatively affect the consumer of books. It's about how this acquisition would negatively impact authors, the creators of books. If defendants' proposed merger is allowed to proceed, Penguin Random House would be by far the largest book publisher in the United States, towering over its rivals. The merger would give Penguin Random House outsized influence over who and what is published and how much authors are paid for their work. Now, before we really dig into this complaint, I've seen the word monopoly brought up a lot in conversation about this complaint. But this complaint is actually about how Penguin Random House would be a monopsony. And there is a difference, and actually the difference between the two is crucial to understanding this whole case and why it's such a big deal for authors. Both monopsony and monopoly are used to describe a single entity, in this case Penguin Random House, that could influence an otherwise free market. A monopoly refers to a seller, and a monopsony refers to a buyer. Penguin Random House is a seller, yeah, but they're also buyers of books from authors. That's why it's important to distinguish the difference, because this whole case is framed not around how the merger would affect consumers buying what Penguin Random House is selling, but around how the merger would affect the authors from whom Penguin Random House is buying the books they sell to consumers. So let's look at the first two articles in the introduction. Authors are the lifeblood of book publishing. Engrave this on my tombstone. Without authors, there would be no stories, no poetry, no biographies, no written discourse on history, arts, culture, society, or politics. Penguin Random House's proposed acquisition of Simon & Schuster would result in substantial harm to authors, particularly authors of anticipated top-selling books. Today, Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster compete vigorously to acquire publishing rights from authors and provide publishing services to those authors. This competition has resulted in authors earning more for their publishing rights in the form of advances, i.e. upfront payments made to authors for the rights to publish their works, and receiving better editorial, marketing, and other services that are critical to the success of their books. In 2020 alone, publishers paid authors over $1 billion in advances. Authors rely on these advances to fund their writing and pay their bills. If you've watched my other traditional publishing videos, and I'll link the playlist up above, you've heard me lament about all of this before. Penguin Random House and all publishers would not exist if it weren't for authors who are writing the books that they are publishing. Yet, over the last few decades, they've made the traditional publishing environment increasingly hostile and unfavorable to authors, with contract conditions and payout schedules that do not favor the author, along with directives passed down that force marketing and publicity teams to focus on only a handful of titles per season and effectively leave all the other authors and their books hanging out to dry, which we can see in our ever-shrinking mid-list. It's frustrating beyond belief, and that's why seeing a complaint filed by the Department of Justice that acknowledged all of this is just so validating. And there's more validation to come. Publishing is a risky business. Only a fraction of books published become commercially successful. Publishers pay significant advances to authors whose books they expect will have commercial success. In most cases, the advance represents an author's total compensation. Yeah, in other words, most authors never earn out their advances. This is something that is just, I don't think outside of our publishing bubble, a lot of people don't realize. They actually spell this out even further down at the bottom of the complaint in Article 24. Most authors do not earn out their advance, and thus their advance generally constitutes their entire earnings from their book. One reason the Big Five are able to offer authors higher advances than smaller publishers is because they can spread the costs and risks of their investment over a larger number of books and authors. They are also able to offer authors the extensive editorial, production, marketing, and publicity support generally needed to produce a top-selling book, and the sales and distribution networks necessary to place books into readers' hands. Publishers other than the Big Five cannot regularly pay the high advances and provide the unique bundle of services needed to secure the publishing rights to anticipated top-selling books and maximize their chances of becoming commercially successful. Simon & Schuster's late CEO likened non-Big Five publishers to farm teams for authors from which the Big Five could cherry-pick talent. In contrast, she described the other Big Five publishers as our biggest competitors, especially for books by already best-selling authors and celebrities, since they are the most likely to come up with the high advance payments required and are known for their strong editorial and publishing skills. There's a lot of truth to that farm team thing, as kind of cringy as the comment is. But I have also seen the opposite happen, where an author with one of the big five gets tired of being a small fish in a really, really big pond, and on their next book, if they have the opportunity to choose, they go with a smaller publisher in the hopes of being a big fish in a small pond. Sometimes it kind of works. I mean, you can definitely get more attention, or you have a better chance at getting more attention, more marketing support at a smaller house. You will almost certainly also take a smaller advance. And in fact, that's something that these small, and we're gonna come back to that small in a little bit here, houses like to say when they find themselves competing with the big five is, okay, we can't offer as much as them, but you will get the support you need to earn this advance out, and then you're actually going to earn royalties, which is something that will not happen to you at the big five. And that's a compelling argument. I mean, if you're trying to build a long-term career as an author, and if the advance that the smaller house is offering isn't that much smaller than what the big five publisher is offering you, I can see that persuading an author. I mean, it might persuade me to go with the smaller house. But in, again, cases that I have actually seen happen to authors who have gone this way, because of the way these contracts are structured, because of the terms and conditions in them, they often wait years to see any kind of royalty check. I mean, literally years, not 1 year, multiple years after the first year that their book is out and earning, okay? And earning out their advance. So in the moment, if you're saying I could get a check for 10 grand this year, or I could get a check for 5 grand this year and another 2 grand in 2 years and another 2 grand 2 years after that, I might still want to go with the 10 grand now. Also, keep in mind that some of these smaller houses will give you a great marketing plan, but that doesn't mean they're always going to pay your way to all of the events that they basically send you to. You might still need to pay your airfare. You might need to still pay for your hotel, all of your travel expenses. And that stuff, when you have a very small advance, I mean, money disappears quickly. So this whole theoretical idea, I think a lot of traditionally published authors, we play with in our minds, of choosing between a big advance from a big house and a smaller advance from a smaller house that promises us a lot of support. This is a little game we like to play in our heads, and I have gone back and forth in my mind a lot over the last 10 years over which one I would prefer. But here's the thing. It's easy for us to position the big five as being the big five evil, bad publishers that are, never have the author's best interest at heart, and all the rest as somehow morally superior, or just they're going to have contracts with better terms and conditions, when in reality, it's all the same, except you're just gonna get less money here. And small is relative. Just because they're small compared to the big five, just because they didn't crack the top five, don't let anyone fool you into thinking these are small companies. Scholastic, HMH, Sourcebooks, Chronicle, Disney are not small. I gotta say, at this moment, right now, I'm kind of still in the take the biggest advance you can and run camp. Anyway, back to the complaint. If consummated, this merger would likely result in substantial harm to authors of anticipated top-selling books and ultimately consumers. Put an asterisk here, it's going to be relevant later. This complaint is focused on authors because it's showing how this merger will harm authors, which will harm books, which will therefore harm consumers. Penguin Random House would control close to half of the market for the acquisition of publishing rights to anticipated top-selling books. Penguin Random House's next largest competitor, that would be HarperCollins, would be less than half its size. Post-merger, the two largest publishers would collectively control more than 2/3 of this market, leaving hundreds of authors with fewer alternatives and less leverage. As illustrated by this chart, when measured by total advances paid to authors for rights to anticipated top-selling books, the combined Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster shown in dark blue and orange, would far outstrip the remaining Big Five publishers and the largest independent publishers, shown in lighter blue, and enjoy substantial market power in its negotiations with authors. Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster compete head-to-head to acquire publishing rights to hundreds of books every year, and this competition has resulted in substantial benefits for authors of anticipated top-selling books. Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster are frequently invited by agents to bid in auctions for the rights to sell these books, and they are often the final two bidders. Competition between Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster has resulted in higher advances, better services, and more favorable contract terms for authors. The proposed merger would eliminate this head-to-head competition, enabling the merged firm to pay less and extract more from authors who often work for years at their craft before producing a book. As a senior Penguin Random House executive remarked to a colleague, quote, "I would not want to be a big author at Simon & Schuster now." The colleague responded, quote, "I agree, especially when the price tag for acquiring Simon & Schuster is going to be so high." By harming authors, the merger is also likely to harm consumers. Again, asterisk, coming back to that. Penguin Random House's global CEO has recognized the principle that reducing author pay means, quote, "fewer authors will be able to make a living from writing," end quote, which in turn, quote, "will have an impact on the output." By reducing author pay, this merger would make it harder for authors to earn a living by writing books, which would in turn lead to a reduction in the quantity and variety of books published. I really love that they have quotes from executives at Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster in this complaint. They can't deny it. Spoiler alert, they deny it. So this is something that authors have been talking about for years. I mean, I've mentioned it in my mid-list videos that I've made. I've referenced the Authors Guild's white paper, which I'll link again in the description below. But it's just full of statistics about how and why the mid-list is shrinking and outlining why that is a very, very bad thing, as this complaint says, for authors and consumers of books. The harder it is for authors to earn a living writing books, the less quantity and variety of books published. Once again, this highlights the Big Five and their executives' constant statements about their commitment to diversity. When you're actively shrinking the pool of authors and books, diversity shrinks right along with it. As the Authors Guild put it in their response to the lawsuit, consolidation doesn't just stifle competition, it also makes acquisition editors less willing to take risks on emerging or mid-list authors, voices from overlooked and marginalized communities, authors with unusual or controversial ideas, and literary writers who challenge the status quo both in content and style. Yet it is only by pushing those limits that literature and society advance. Fewer publishers also mean less diversity, as the remaining players chase mega sellers and celebrity books with seven-figure advances at the expense of funding smaller, riskier books. Have you ever seen a person refer to themselves, like their individual person, as diverse? And you know they mean they're a part of a marginalized community or several marginalized communities, but like, technically speaking, by definition, one human being can't be diverse. I think publishers are knowingly or maybe unknowingly making that mistake when they proudly point to a diverse book that they won at auction. I mean, awesome for that book, awesome for that author, but that's not the point and that's not the problem. The more books and authors you have, the more diverse the selection of books that you're going to be offering. But that's not what's happening at any of these publishers. They're shrinking. They're putting more and more of their focus on fewer number of authors and books. That means less diversity, period. Another way Big Five executives lie baldly to our faces is by claiming publicly that their decisions, such as this Penguin Random House Simon & Schuster merger, are necessary to create a strong counterweight to Amazon. But once again, behind closed doors, it turns out that's not the case. In Article 10 of this complaint, there is a quote from Penguin Random House's global CEO in which he privately admitted he never bought into that argument, and that one goal after the merger is to become an exceptional partner to Amazon. It's nice to see them admit this, even though they didn't actually admit it because they didn't want this to be known publicly. But also, it's just So infuriating. And as we'll talk about later in the video, this guy and all those other guys are still pretending that they have authors' best interests at heart. Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster both recognize that a merger of their companies would give rise to substantial antitrust risk. When Simon & Schuster announced that it was up for sale in March 2020, its current CEO wrote to one of its best-selling authors, quote, "I'm pretty sure that the Department of Justice wouldn't allow Penguin Random House to buy us, but that's assuming we still have a Department of Justice." Okay, to be fair, I want to point out that during a town hall with current staff members, the current CEO of Simon & Schuster, who is Jonathan Karp, confirmed that he did write this to this author, but said he was joking. Quote, "I wrote that to an author when the sale was announced in March of 2020. I wasn't the CEO, I was the publisher of Simon & Schuster. I was making a joke. I was reassuring an author who said, wouldn't it be ironic if Penguin Random House ended up buying Simon & Schuster? So I did write that to the author. It was a joke." Okay, first, thanks, John, for acknowledging that your author was worried. Again, these executives, and okay, he wasn't the CEO, he was the publisher, still an executive. They know, we know, this is a bad thing for us. So he, in his words, reassures his author by saying, "I'm sure the DOJ won't let it happen if there even is a DOJ." Can we put this in context for a second? This was March 2020. What else was going on then? I don't know, the first wave of the pandemic in the United States and our country's first lockdown. Like, there was a highly charged presidential election going on, and just generally like a lot of fear and uncertainty and stress and anxiety. And like generally everything was a trash fire that was just getting hotter and hotter. And this guy reassures his author by joking about how we might not have a Department of Justice in the near future. It's funny, but not in the way that I think he intended. Also, man, Jonathan, just because you were joking doesn't mean you weren't also kinda speaking your truth. Forget the second part, the punchline about the DOJ not existing. He said, "I'm sure the DOJ won't let the merger happen." So either Jonathan believed that on some level, meaning that he, the publisher of Simon & Schuster, saw the antitrust violation implications of the merger, or he was just completely blowing smoke up his worried author's ass by telling them what they wanted to hear. Either way, So this complaint actually gets into self-publishing, and I found this really interesting. They point out that the acquisition of U.S. publishing rights to books from authors is a relevant product market within Section 7 of the Clayton Act, and says a hypothetical monopsonist would profitably decrease the advances paid to authors by a small but significant non-transitory amount. And then they went on to say, self-publishing is not a reasonable alternative for most authors seeking to sell the publishing rights to their books in exchange for an advance. By definition, self-publishing does not pay authors advances, which authors often use to fund their writing. Self-publishing also does not include the breadth of editorial, distribution, and marketing services that are important factors in whether a book will become commercially successful. Indeed, an internal Simon & Schuster document acknowledged that, quote, self-publishing is not viewed as a threat to our core business. Authors of books would not substitute to self-publishing in sufficient numbers to deter a hypothetical monopsonist from imposing a small but significant and non-transitory decrease in advances. This is something that I have talked about a lot, and I know a lot of other traditionally published authors and aspiring authors have talked about when asked, why not just self-publish? And I think they did a great job of articulating the exact reasons why here. It's not a jab at self-publishing, it's just pointing out that these are two completely different industries. I mean, say you wanted to run a donut shop. Okay, do you want to open a small business that is fully owned by you, in which you are making donuts from your own recipe and selling them? Or do you want to become a franchisee and manager of a Dunkin' Donuts? Those are two really different things, and they're both great. You could go either path, but they're just super different. And that's not a perfect analogy to the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing, but I hope it illustrates my point. And this complaint also covers IP stuff, work for hire contracts, which you guys know is a really big part of my career, so I found this really interesting as well. Some publishers hire authors on a work for hire basis to draft books conceived of by the publisher, not the author. The publisher and not the author owns the publishing rights in a work for hire arrangement. Moreover, such authors generally are compensated differently than authors who sell the rights to publish their books in exchange for an advance and royalties. Authors of books would not substitute to work for hire arrangement in sufficient numbers to deter a hypothetical monopsonist from imposing a small but significant non-transitory decrease in advances. Now, further down the complaint, starting around Article 44, there are some eye-popping figures where they detail specific auctions between Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster to illustrate how the competition was good for the author. The first is for an auction for a Grammy Award-winning singer in January 2019. Simon & Schuster made a preemptive offer for $5 million. After this initial offer was rejected, Simon & Schuster increased its bid to $6 million, and Penguin Random House countered with $7 million plus $2.5 million in potential bonuses. Upon hearing of Penguin Random House's bid, Simon & Schuster's then president emailed his boss, quote, "I'm concerned that if we offer less than $8 million, the author's agent will go back to PRH. She said they were willing to offer more." Simon & Schuster eventually won with a bid of $8 million. $8 million. This is a whole other can of worms, but oh my God. What I would love to see is the sales figures for this book now that it's probably been out for a year or so. Gawker had an article where they went through all of these and speculated, like did a little digging trying to figure out who the memoir was for. And I'll link to that down below. They speculated this was for Olivia Newton-John's memoir, but I kind of suspect they might be wrong about that because they seem to have read the she here, as in she said they were willing to offer more from the president's email to his boss, as referring to the singer and not the singer's agent. I think it refers to the singer's agent, and that means that Gawker ruled out all potential male singers who got memoir deals from Simon & Schuster. So they think it was Olivia Newton-John. I contest that. But anyway, it doesn't even matter. What are the odds that this memoir earned out $8 million? I speculated on this, did a little math with a friend who worked in publishing. If you can get an $8 million advance, you can probably negotiate some pretty good royalty rates. But to keep it simple, 10% list is a common starting royalty rate for a hardcover. So say the hardcover lists for $25, so the author would earn $250 per book. This wouldn't happen, but if every sale qualified for that 10% list royalty, you would need to sell 3.2 million copies to earn out. In reality, it would probably be a lot more than that because so many of those copies would be sold at a deep discount to a big box store, to a subscription service, or a book club, etc. 3.2 million copies. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I am saying it's really unlikely. These publishers throw millions of dollars around in these ridiculous bidding wars, knowing that in all likelihood giving an author an advance of that size is going to come at a loss for them. Meanwhile, telling most of their other authors that they don't have, I don't know, say $200 in their budget to help get them to that book festival they were invited to. Or, you know, telling them they were gonna bump the publication date of their book and along with it, the next installment of their advance payment, despite it being in the contract that they are supposed to get the installment of that advance on that specific day. And maybe the author has, you know, kind of been counting on that to like pay her bills, and suddenly she is on her hands and knees begging her agent and her editor to try and do something about this and get her the money that she was promised in her contract because she's already revised the book and she's fulfilled her end of the bargain. She's done what she was contractually able to do, and like she wants to eat. But it turns out Penguin Random House doesn't care what's in her contract and doesn't care that she has rent to pay, and they're just gonna hang on to that $2,500 for the next couple months and she can take her whining and shut. As my friend said, this whole industry and its practices seems as though they could have only been designed by a bunch of drunk old legacy grads meeting up at the Yale Club. Anyway, this complaint also acknowledges the fix Penguin Random House proposed to preserve competition, stating that Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster imprints could continue bidding against one another. In other words, that theoretically after the merger, an author could still go to auction between two imprints within what would be, at this point, one house. The complaint calls this out for the BS that it is. Penguin Random House is basically saying, trust us, we won't use our market power to benefit our shareholders. We have authors' best interests at heart. And I mean, is anyone falling for that? So again, link below to the whole complaint if you want to download it and check it out. But now let's talk about how Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster reacted to this complaint. Keeping in mind that we have heard so many quotes from them already within the complaint, in which they tell us how they really feel. Here's the memo that circulated internally at Penguin Random House. This didn't go out to authors, this was just for the staff members. First, I want to reassure you that this has no impact on our day-to-day business. We can and should continue to stay focused on serving our authors, retailers, and readers in the best way possible. Second, we firmly believe the DOJ is mistaken. We are committed to vigorously defending this acquisition and know it will benefit all constituents, including authors, agents, retailers, and ultimately readers, and will do nothing to undermine the robust competitive publishing landscape that currently exists. The DOJ has claimed a series of concerns primarily around the buying power for author content, leading to a risk of reduction in author advances and creative output. There's absolutely no evidence to support this, whether looking to the recent past and our experience of combining Penguin and Random House or considering the competitive marketplace for author content that exists today. The DOJ maintains that the market for author content is limited to the so-called Big Five publishers. This is untrue. As you all know and experience day to day, we participate in an exceptionally competitive market that includes a wide range of publishers, and nothing about this transaction will change that. With more books being published than ever before, the continuing fragmentation of our industry, and the considerable growth of publishers of all sizes, the combined market share of PRH and Simon & Schuster should not warrant regulatory concerns. Since the moment Viacom CBS decided to sell Simon & Schuster, we at Penguin Random House knew Simon & Schuster would have its best home with us, a place that would be committed to carrying forward its storied legacy. We continue to firmly believe this. Our goal is for the new combined company to be truly greater than the sum of its parts, and our focus is to grow our community of distinct imprints that will operate independently and autonomously and will continue to compete vigorously among themselves and with outside competitors, a process that best serves the objective that every author finds the right editor and the best imprint for their work to develop and flourish. To support this, we have already publicly committed to keeping the Simon & Schuster imprints as an external bidder in auctions after the closing, further assuring that this merger will not impact authors in a negative way. Nothing to see here, folks, as basically their response, and no acknowledgement of the things that their own executives were quoted as saying within the complaint that directly contrast this statement here. Penguin Random House's global CEO has recognized the principle that reducing author pay means, quote, fewer authors will be able to make a living from writing, end quote, which in turn, quote, will have an impact on the output. But okay, it takes a lot of guts, ignorance, lack of ethics and morals to come out here and say, no, this will be good for authors. When in the last year, we all know that they have seen great profits, while we've seen for ourselves that our contracts and our advances are getting worse and smaller. Even funnier is the message that the CEO of Simon & Schuster, the great comedian Jonathan Karp, sent to Simon & Schuster's authors. I'm sure many of you have seen reports in the media that the U.S. Department of Justice has filed suit to block this acquisition. The DOJ contends that PRH's acquisition of Simon & Schuster will reduce competition for the acquisition of titles. Notably, DOJ has not alleged that the acquisition would harm competition in the sale of books. Remember those asterisks? This complaint is focused on authors because it's showing how this merger will harm authors, which will harm books, which will therefore harm consumers. It is bad for the consumer, it is, but it starts with the fact that it's bad for authors. Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House strongly disagree with the DOJ that this transaction will harm competition and believe firmly that there is no basis for these claims. Penguin Random House is determined to fight vigorously to bring this transaction to fruition, and we will be doing all we can to help in those efforts. I understand that some of you may have questions over what this means going forward, but rest assured, over the last 18 months, amid an unprecedented series of disruptions to our company, our industry, and to the world at large, we have remained focused, energetic, and creative in our efforts on behalf of your work. We will continue steadfast in our determination and ability to give your books the very best publication they can receive. As I have mentioned before, Simon & Schuster has changed ownership 7 times over the course of our 97-year history, and always our authors and our books have remained our principal concern, interest, and passion. We are committed to working together with PRH to fight this lawsuit. It's quite possible that there will be further developments as this process continues to unfold. When we have news to share, we will. In the meantime, I thank you for your patience, and as ever, am grateful for the opportunity to publish you. Sincerely, Jonathan Karp. P.S. Too bad we still have a Department of Justice, am I right? Lol. Okay, I added the P.S. First of all, I love his assumption here that his authors are worried the merger might not happen when all the authors I talk to have been popping champagne. But anyway, Karp points out that the complaint they filed doesn't allege harm to competition of sales. Yeah, dude, we know your profits have been great. And you gotta love the line, "We've changed ownership 7 times in the last century." Like, the changing of ownership is not what the complaint is about. It's about the fact that said owner is already the largest trade publisher in the world. But I guess this is Executive Crisis Management 101. If you can't deny something, you just deflect and pretend the issue is something else entirely. Anyway, cheers to the attorneys who filed this complaint, and cheers to the Department of Justice for actually recognizing that authors exist. And cheers to the author of my favorite tweet to come out of all of this in response to the news that Penguin Random House had hired attorney Daniel Petruccelli to represent them. But what they don't say is that Penguin Random House is paying Mr. Petruccelli $15,000 upon signing, $10,000 upon delivery of the materials, $15,000 for winning the case, and $10,000 6 months after the ruling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys Friday with another video.